Hey guys, today we're going to talk about structural functionalism, which is a sociological theory. Okay, it is really interesting, and we will have to focus on two different concepts. Number one, structure, and then function. Okay, so as we discussed in the past in other classes, we can say that structures are institutions, are groups of people who interact, who work together for a specific purpose within society. Remember that structures have to be essential for a society. Okay, so that is something really important. But then the function, it is also really important in this theory. The function is what is the reason these institutions these institutions exist for. Okay, so let's go in depth. Number one, as we say, this is the theory that tries to explain how the social conducts, the way we behave, is related to process and roles and functions, okay, of the members that belong to that society. So what is the meaning of all of this? Well, you have to understand society has a lot of institutions, okay? So as we already discussed in the other classes, you might remember that, for instance, the base or the basic institutions for a society is going to be the family as a whole, okay? And then we're going to have a lot of other institutions. You may have law enforcement institutions like the police, and then you also have the army, and then you have religious institutions, and we have so many different churches. And we also have health institutions, and we have different hospitals, and we have government institutions that run the countries, and we have political institutions, and so on. Okay, you already have an idea of how many institutions we can have within a society, right? Then the point here is that we also have to understand how the processes each institution, the way they interlink, they relate to each other, affect the social behavior, basically. Okay? And for this, we are going to have some really important concepts you need to understand. Number one, it is the role. That is the play you the role, sorry, this is the role you play in society, the part you play in society. Okay? So what is your role in the school? Your role is to be a student. But in your house, you may have the role of a son, and maybe even you have to help with some things, okay? Or maybe you belong to a sports team and you have a specific role in there, or you belong to a band and you have to play a specific role in there, like maybe playing the guitar or playing the drums or singing, okay? So in every different social group and institution you belong to, you play a specific role, okay? But then you also have the status. So what is the status of the role in the hierarchy? You have to understand this. This is really important in society. There are hierarchies, okay? And sometimes we would like to get rid of them, which is not possible because we have always worked with hierarchies, and probably we will do it for another 1,000 years, okay? So you have to understand there are hierarchies, and then if you understand the hierarchy, you will understand the status. So for instance, we are in the school, right? So we have a that is for instance just in the first place that is going to be an structure, and we will say it's an educational institution, right? And then within that structure we have a hierarchy, and we have the director of campus, and then we have high school director, and then we have coordinators, academic coordinators, uh, extracurricular activities coordinator, and then we have the leaders, who work with you, and under the leaders we have the teachers, and under the teachers we may have the students, and so on. So that is the hierarchy. So your role might be as a student, and your status, okay, within that hierarchy, it might be one of the lowest, right? Because you are at the bottom of the hierarchy as an student. And then maybe as a coordinator, you're in the middle of the hierarchy, so your status is higher in this hierarchy, okay? Then we might switch, and now you are going into your soccer team if you play soccer. And then you have the status maybe as a striker, as a player. But at the same time, you have a higher status because you're the captain of the team. So there, or you are the main striker of your team. So that gives you a different status. Okay, so your status is going to change also depending on where you are, which structure you are working with at that specific point. So just remember, you will have different roles and different statuses depending on how many groups or institutions you belong to. Okay, then, of course, you have a structure again, and that is the distribution of the parts of a body. That's one of the ways they interpret it here in this theory. So you have to think, and I like this concept a lot, society as a huge body. Okay, so just imagine that our society is like a huge body, and the body has different parts. And it is really important. We have to understand we cannot have the same role and the same status as the rest. That is just a fallacy. Why? Imagine that everybody decides that they want to be a head, and the only thing we have in the world are heads. So we need the bodies, we need the legs to walk, we need the hands to grab things, we need the chest, so we have the heart inside pumping blood. So every part of the body is equally important. Okay? And if you miss one of those parts, you affect the way the structure or the society works. So that is the main idea behind a structure, functional structuralism. You have a huge body, and the function each one of the pieces of that body has is really important for the whole body to work perfectly. Okay, so we have to understand it. Understand this. We have heads, so maybe they have to do the thinking, and then we have hands so we can grab and create things, and we have legs so we can walk around. Okay, so every part is really important. Okay, so let's remember that hierarchies and structures are really important so we can have this balance. And then we will see the last concept, which are systems. Okay, the system is a combination of these structures, and as I already told you, they are interdependent. It means that one needs the other. The head without the torso would die because it wouldn't have the blood that comes from the heart, so it would die because it wouldn't have oxygen, right? And then the torso and the head need the legs because they need to move around, and with no legs it's really hard to move around. And then the legs and the rest of the body need the hands so they can grab things, they can get a hold of things, okay? They can create new things, right? So the thumb is really important. You may say I have another four fingers, yes, but also the thumb is really important. The pinky finger is really important, and every organ and every bone in your body is really really important to make all the functions, to execute all the functions you need to execute as a person. Okay, so it is the same with the systems in society. We need to see that government, for instance, may need like private companies, but private companies also need government, and then we all society might need police or the army. Okay, and the structural functionalism tries to understand how this interdependence works in a specific society. Something that is really important to remember here is that every society has almost all the time the same institutions, but the value they get is different. For instance, if you think about religion, in Mexico, the religious institutions are still really important. You know, like the hierarchy, they have the status. For instance, for the Catholic Church in Mexico is still really high. But if you compare that to maybe the states where Catholicism is not the main religion, you will see that that institution, the Catholic Church, has a lower status, but still it has to relate with the government. So how the Catholic Church and the government interact in Mexico is different how the Catholic Church and the government interact in the states. And then, of course, you have several countries where religious institutions are not really that important anymore. So the status is lower, but the institution still exists. Okay. Then you have the army, for instance, and you have many countries where the army is not really important. So the hierarchy and the status is really, really low. But they still have to interconnect, and they have to communicate with the government and the people and the families, for instance. And then you have countries like the States and Russia and maybe China where they invest a lot of money in the army. So the hierarchy of the army is higher, and then you have to understand how they interact with the rest of the society. So that is interdependency. Okay. Then you have balance. A society tends towards balance, which is actually truth. And that is not true only for societies, that is also truth for the whole world, the whole nature. Okay, nature tends to balance all the time. So this is something really important. If you lose one of the limbs, or you lose one of the structures, or one of the pieces of the body, the rest of the body will have to find a way to not replace, but at least compensate the loss of that specific piece. Okay, so the same happens in society. Let's, for instance, think that we may lose police. Okay, if we lose police as an institution, we will have to create something else that takes its place, so we can uh, feel secure. Okay, like a bad example might be like we just lost the federal police, so now we have to create a new law enforcement body, and we call it the National Guard. Okay, so in the end, you just took elements from a different institution, so that those elements could just replace the one that you lost. So that is tending toward balance. Okay, and we are always looking for that balance. It takes time, but eventually we go back to a new balance and do a new normal. So that is what is happening right now with the COVID situation, right? We are losing some things that were part of our balance in the past, like in the last 6 months. We have to adapt and change, and we're adapting, and now we are replacing some things and some structures with new structures. Okay, so we are finding a new balance in this new normal or new normality. Okay, and then the systems can be static or dynamic. They can be moving, or they can be just in the same way for a long period of time. So, for instance, you may think that probably the Catholic Church is an institution that has been static for the most part, it hasn't changed a lot. And then you have institutions like the government, which are dynamic, they are changing all the time. Okay, so those are some of the most important concepts we have in this theory. And then we have some of the main characteristics of this theory. As I already told you, we are going to study the cultural expressions and norms of a society. So, for instance, if you want to understand the traditions of a society, you have to understand these structures. So, if you want to understand Dia de Muertos in Mexico, which is about to happen, you have to understand the structures that are behind them. Why is it so popular in Mexico? And you may talk, okay, because we're really religious, because we have all of these traditions behind us, and these traditions are part of our structures and the functions we have as a society. Okay, so we understand these norms from the culture through the institutions. Then we have to understand that some facts and some institutions may be dysfunctional. So, for instance, you might have created an institutions like police to keep people safe, but in the end they corrupted, right? And um, they are not fulfilling that specific function. So when we are having this functionality, then we have to find balance again. So as I already told you, we have to find a new way to accomplish the goal we had for that specific institution, which is not working anymore, from a different side. Okay, but we have to remember that some functions or structures might be dysfunctional, so we have to replace them or we have to compensate them. Then not all of them are positive, okay, or essential. That is also really important. We have institutions which are not essential for a society, even though they exist. Maybe one of them you might say, okay, maybe sports team, especially professional sports teams. They are like, we don't really need them. They are in there and they are really important. For instance, in Mexican society, football teams are really important, right? They are not as important in some states, like maybe in the center of Mexico, you have football teams as a structure. And northern states, they don't have as many, or they don't have professional football teams because they are not essential institutions. Okay, while we all have police institutions or government institutions or religious institutions because those are more essential. Okay, so not all of them are positive or essential. Positive means that they not necessarily do something good for the society. Okay, so we have like criminal organizations, and you might say that is also a structure, and that is also the result of a social process. but that doesn't mean they are positive for the society. Okay, so that is also something really important to remember. And then the role and the status you have as a person is also really important. Okay, and sadly, but that is the way we live. We belong in a hierarchy, and we have to understand what is the status that we belong to in a society, and that is something we already discussed in other classes. And we may also refer that as a class. What is your social class, your economical class, and so on. So where do you belong in the hierarchy of society? It is really important to understand it, because if we understand the hierarchy and the status, we also understand some of the cultural manifestations, and that is something quite polemic these days, but it is still truth. And if we want to understand society and its problems, we also have to understand the roles and the statuses of the people in it. So I hope that was clear enough. And if you have any questions, just let me know in class. I will see you.